Hey everyone, and welcome back for another deep dive. Today we are going to be tackling a single source, an academic article that really grabbed my attention.
Oh, yeah?
It's called The Trojan Horse of Texas v. Becerra, A Fight for Disability Rights, Trans Liberation, and Solidarity by Dr. Jaime Hoerricks.
Interesting title.
Yeah, right, that Trojan horse metaphor, what's lurking inside this lawsuit?
Well, it's definitely an interesting approach. The lawsuit, Texas v. Becerra, is about 17 states are challenging whether gender dysphoria should be covered under disability protections. But Dr. Hoerricks, who is trans himself, argues that there's a much bigger agenda at play. They see it as like a calculated attack on the entire foundation of disability rights.
Whoa.
Yeah, and the implications they could reach far beyond trans people.
Okay, so it's not just about gender dysphoria. I have to admit, I'm already hooked. What's the bigger picture that Dr. Hoerricks is painting here?
Well, one of the key arguments is that the lawsuit strategically uses a legal approach called textualism to try and dismantle disability rights piece by piece.
Textualism.
Textualism essentially means sticking to the literal text of a law
Okay.
and ignoring any evolving interpretations or context.
So could you give me an example of how textualism could be used to restrict disability rights, to help me understand this better?
Sure. Imagine a law written before smartphones existed,
Okay.
guaranteeing communication access for people with disabilities. A strict textualist might argue that because the law doesn't specifically mention smartphones, it doesn't apply to them. So that means deaf people wouldn't be guaranteed accommodations like captioned video calls,
Right.
even though that's essential for communication today.
That makes a lot of sense. It seems like kind of a sneaky way to exploit the letter of the law while ignoring the spirit of it.
Exactly. Dr. Hoerricks sees this tactic as a way to roll back decades of progress on disability rights, with trans people being the first target in a much broader strategy.
This is where it gets really interesting for me. The states involved in this lawsuit. Some are no surprise, given their track record on LGBTQIA+ rights. But Alaska, they legalized same-sex marriage years ago. What are they doing in this lawsuit?
Right. That's what makes this so intriguing. Alaska's involvement shows how these broader movements can capture even seemingly progressive states. Dr. Hoerricks points out that political pressure from national groups can sometimes outweigh local values. It highlights how interconnected these fights are.
Okay, let's rewind for a second. I know some listener might be thinking, hold on, is gender dysphoria really a disability?
Right.
How does Dr. Hoerricks address that?
They approach it using the social model of disability, which basically flips the script on how we traditionally view disability.
Okay.
Instead of seeing it as a flaw within the individual, the social model recognizes that it's the barriers society puts up.
Like what?
Laws, attitudes, even physical environments that create disabling conditions.
So it's not about fixing the individual, but about changing the systems and structures that exclude people.
Precisely. Dr. Hoerricks even uses their own life as an example. They talk about how much easier it was to transition in California with its more progressive laws and social attitudes compared to their experience in Florida.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, this personal touch really highlights how different environments can have a profound impact on a person's ability to thrive.
That really drives home the point, doesn't it?
Yeah.
It's not just abstract theory, it's about real people's lives. But back to the lawsuit. What about the states leading this charge? What's motivating them to target gender dysphoria and potentially unravel disability rights in the process?
This is where Dr. Hoerricks does some serious digging. And it's fascinating they analyze the history of these states,
Okay.
many of which have a long and consistent pattern of opposing equity and inclusion.
Really?
We're talking Jim Crow laws, anti-LGBTQIA+ legislation, even strong anti-labor policies. Yeah, it paints a picture of a deep-seated resistance to change and a commitment to maintaining existing hierarchies.
So it's not just a coincidence that these particular states are leading this lawsuit. It's tied to their overall ideologies and power structures.
Exactly. And many of these states rely heavily on industries like oil, agriculture, and manufacturing. Industries that often rely on cheap labor and minimal regulation.
So are you suggesting that trans rights somehow threaten those economic interests?
Dr. Hoerricks makes a thought-provoking argument along those lines. They say that by challenging traditional gender roles, trans existence fundamentally disrupts the hierarchies that these states depend on.
Huh.
It's not necessarily a conscious, coordinated attack, but a sort of underlying tension.
So trans people become an easy target, a scapegoat for larger anxieties about shifting power dynamics.
You're catching on. And it goes even deeper. Dr. Hoerricks analyzes the language of the lawsuit itself
Okay.
and finds it very carefully crafted, designed to advance a specific agenda.
Wait, so it's not just about the legal arguments. The actual words they're using matter?
Absolutely. The wording is intentionally vague and broad. setting the stage for a domino effect that could impact far more than just gender dysphoria. Remember that textualism tactic we discussed earlier?
Yeah.
This lawsuit seems designed to lay the groundwork for that kind of narrow interpretation of disability rights, limiting their scope and adaptability.
Okay, this Trojan horse metaphor is really starting to make sense.
Yeah,
It seems like there's a whole lot more hiding inside this lawsuit than meets the eye.
that's exactly Dr. Hoerricks' point. And to understand what's truly at stake here, we need to explore the forces driving this agenda. Dr. Hoerricks identifies three main players: dominionist oligarchs,
Okay.
powerful think tanks like the Heritage Foundation, and of course corporate interests.
Whoa, that's a powerful mix. I'm particularly curious about the dominionists. That's not a term everyone might be familiar with. Can you break that down for us?
Dominionism, especially in the form of Christian nationalism, it advocates for a Christian nation based on a strict interpretation of the Bible.
Okay.
And you might be thinking, what does this have to do with me?
Right.
Well, this agenda can directly shape laws and policies, impacting access to healthcare, education, even your right to self-determination.
Okay, that definitely connects it back to the listener. So how do dominionists view disability? How does that tie into this lawsuit?
Dr. Hoerricks explains that dominionists see disability as a theological challenge. They struggle to reconcile the idea of a perfect God with the existence of disability. This leads to a desire to erase difference, whether it's racial, gender, or disability, fitting into those dangerous eugenicist ideas we've seen throughout history.
So in their worldview, targeting trans people and weakening disability rights aligns with their goal of creating a society that conforms to their narrow definition of normal.
That's a key takeaway here. And this is just the beginning of understanding what's truly motivating this seemingly simple lawsuit. Ready to dive deeper into the other forces at play?
Absolutely. I'm on the edge of my seat here. This is getting really thought-provoking. Let's keep unpacking this Trojan horse. Welcome back, everyone. I don't know about you, but my mind is buzzing after that first segment. This lawsuit is like an onion. The more layers we peel back, the more complexity we find.
And speaking of complex layers, last time we were just starting to unpack those other powerful forces Dr. Hoerricks identify as driving this agenda. Think tanks like the Heritage Foundation and, of course, corporate interests. Where do they fit into all of this?
Right, let's dive into that. The Heritage Foundation, I know they're a big player in conservative politics, but what's their specific interest in this lawsuit?
Well, think tanks like the Heritage Foundation play a crucial role in shaping public policy and influencing legal strategies.
Okay.
They produce research, they write legal briefs, and they lobby politicians, all with the goal of advancing their specific agenda.
So they're not just passively observing this lawsuit, they're actively trying to shape its outcome.
Exactly. And their involvement in Texas v. Becerra fits into a much broader pattern of pushing for policies that benefit the wealthy and powerful while eroding social safety nets.
Like,
Think tax cuts for corporations, deregulation of industries, and restrictions on labor unions.
okay, I'm starting to see the connections here, but how does targeting trans people and potentially weakening disability rights fit into that agenda?
Well, remember how Dr. Hoerricks highlighted the economic interests of those states leading the lawsuit?
Yeah.
Those same interests often align with the agenda of groups like the Heritage Foundation. They see regulations and legal protections, especially those related to disability rights, as obstacles to profit maximization.
So it's about minimizing costs, even if it means sacrificing the well-being of marginalized groups.
That's a key takeaway here. And it's not just about saving a few bucks on accommodations. It's about maintaining a system that prioritizes corporate profits over human needs.
This brings us to the third force Dr. Hoerricks identifies, corporate interests. What's their stake in this lawsuit? It seems a little less obvious than the dominionists or the think tanks.
Yeah, on the surface it might seem counterintuitive. After all, some corporations have been quite vocal in supporting LGBTQIA+ rights.
Right.
But Dr. Hoerricks argues that this support is often superficial, a form of pinkwashing to boost their public image.
Pinkwashing, that's a new one for me. What does that mean exactly?
It means presenting yourself as an ally to LGBTQIA+ people, while simultaneously engaging in practices that harm those communities. For example, a company might donate to LGBTQIA+ charities while also lobbying against laws that protect trans people from discrimination.
That's pretty cynical. It sounds like they're trying to have their cake and eat it too.
That's exactly what Dr. Hoerricks is getting at, and they point out a particularly stark example: Big Pharma.
Okay.
Pharmaceutical companies make huge profits from gender-affirming treatments, while some simultaneously fund politicians who actively attack trans rights.
But that seems completely contradictory. How can they justify that kind of double standard?
It all comes back to profit, unfortunately.
Yeah.
For some corporations, it's simply about maximizing shareholder value, even if it means undermining the rights and well-being of marginalized groups. It's a classic example of capitalism prioritizing profit over people.
This whole conversation is making me rethink the motivations behind seemingly simple actions. It's like we're constantly being manipulated by forces we don't even fully understand.
That's why it's so important to be critical thinkers and to question the narratives we're being fed. Don't just accept things at face value. Dig deeper, look for the underlying agendas, and consider who benefits from the status quo.
Okay, so we've unpacked these three powerful forces driving this agenda, but Dr. Hoerricks doesn't just leave us with a sense of doom and gloom, right? They offer some solutions, some ways to resist these powerful forces. What are they?
Absolutely. And the first step, as Dr. Hoerricks emphasizes, is recognizing the urgency of the situation. They quote Martin Niemöller, a German pastor who spoke out against the Nazi regime.
Oh, the famous first they came for quote. That's such a powerful reminder of how apathy and inaction can pave the way for tyranny.
Exactly. Niemöller's words remind us how oppression often starts by targeting one group, making it seem like an isolated incident. Then it slowly expands until it's too late to stop it.
So in this case, trans people might be the first target, but the consequences could impact a much wider circle.
Precisely. And that's why Dr. Hoerricks stresses the need for solidarity.
Okay.
It's not just about helping trans people or defending disability rights. It's about recognizing that an attack on one group is an attack on all of us. They urge us to support trans-led and disability justice organizations, amplify their voices, and contribute resources however we can.
This makes sense. These organizations are on the front lines of these fights. They have the expertise and experience to effectively challenge harmful policies and advocate for change.
Absolutely. By supporting them, we're not just helping those specific communities, we're strengthening the entire movement for justice and equity. And let's face it, many of these organizations are chronically underfunded and understaffed. Even the small donations or volunteering a few hours a month can make a real difference.
And don't underestimate the power of amplifying their voices, right? Sharing their social media posts, talking to friends and family about their work, helping to spread their message.
Exactly. Awareness is key. We need to break through those bubbles that capitalism and the media create. The ones that make it seem like these are isolated issues that only affect certain groups.
The more people who understand the connections, the more we can build that collective power needed to challenge these systems of oppression. But it's not just about fighting back, right? Dr. Hoerricks also talks about the importance of envisioning a better world, a world where equity isn't something we have to fight for, but something that's just built into the fabric of society.
Right. It's about shifting our mindset from a place of scarcity and competition to one of abundance and cooperation. And this is where socialism comes in, offering a potential pathway to a more equitable future.
Okay, so let's talk about socialism, because I know that word can be loaded for some people. What does a socialist approach to disability justice actually look like in practice?
It starts with recognizing that everyone has different needs and abilities, and that that's not a bad thing. Instead of forcing everyone to conform to a narrow definition of productive or normal,
Right.
a socialist society would provide the support and resources needed for everyone to thrive. Think of it as investing in each other and valuing each other's unique contributions.
So things like accessible healthcare, education, and transportation, regardless of income or ability.
Exactly. And it goes beyond just basic needs. It's about creating a society where everyone feels valued and has the opportunity to contribute in their own way.
Which is a stark contrast to the capitalist framework we live in now, where your worth is often measured by your productivity and how much profit you can generate.
That's a key difference. And I think it's important to emphasize that socialism isn't about taking things away from people. It's about ensuring that everyone has enough, that resources are distributed equitably, and that we prioritize collective well-being over individual accumulation of wealth.
So instead of a few people hoarding wealth and power, it's about sharing resources and creating a more just and sustainable society for all.
That's the core idea. And that includes challenging those deep-seated beliefs about disability that we've internalized from centuries of capitalist propaganda. The idea that disabled people are dependent or a burden on society
Right.
is a harmful myth that needs to be dismantled.
It sounds like a pretty radical shift in how we think about the world.
It is. But, as Dr. Hoerricks reminds us, the systems we have now aren't working for the vast majority of people. Capitalism is inherently exploitative, and it will always prioritize profit over people. We need a fundamental change if we want to create a truly just and equitable world.
This has been such an insightful conversation so far. Thank you for helping me and our listeners really grasp the depth and urgency of this issue.
It's been my pleasure, and I'm excited to continue this discussion in Part 3, where we'll move beyond critique and really dig into what we can all do to make a difference.
Yes, because it's one thing to understand the problem, but it's another thing entirely to actually do something about it. Stay tuned, everyone, because we're not done with this deep dive yet. Welcome back to the final part of our deep dive into Dr. Hoerricks' article. We've covered a lot of ground, from the Trojan horse metaphor to those powerful forces driving this agenda. But now let's shift gears and talk about solutions. Dr. Hoerricks doesn't just leave us with a bleak outlook. They offer a vision for a better future. Are you ready to explore that with me?
Absolutely. I think it's crucial to move beyond critique and actually explore what a more just and equitable future looks like, especially for disabled people.
Right, because it's not enough to just put out fires. We need to create a world where those fires don't even start in the first place. And Dr. Hoerricks argues that this starts with a fundamental shift in how we think about disability itself.
Right. They advocate for moving away from the medical model of disability, which views it as an individual deficit to be fixed or cured, and embracing the social model, which we've touched on already.
Okay, so to recap, the medical model says the problem is with the individual, while the social model says the problem is with the barriers society creates. What would embracing that social model look like in practice?
Imagine a world where buildings are designed with accessibility in mind from the get-go, where education is tailored to different learning styles and needs, not just standardized tests, where workplaces are flexible and accommodating, valuing diverse contributions.
That sounds amazing. But how do we get from where we are now to that kind of world? Dr. Hoerricks does mention universal design. What does that mean exactly?
Universal design is about creating environments and products that are usable by everyone, regardless of ability. Think of like those curb cuts
Oh, yeah.
we talked about earlier. They were originally designed for wheelchair users, but they benefit everyone.
Oh, I love that example. It shows how accessibility features can actually improve things for everyone, not just disabled people. It's a win-win situation.
Exactly. Universal design embodies that win-win thinking. It's about recognizing that our differences make us stronger, and that creating a world that works for everyone ultimately benefits all of us.
Okay, I'm sold on the idea of universal design. But how do we actually make it happen? It seems like such a huge shift.
It's definitely a big challenge, but not insurmountable. We need a multi-pronged approach. First, we need to advocate for policy changes at all levels of government that mandate accessibility and universal design principles. Second, we need to educate architects, designers, and developers about these principles, ensuring they're incorporated into every project from the very beginning.
And third, we need to hold businesses and institutions accountable for creating inclusive environments. That might mean like filing lawsuits, organizing boycotts, or using our consumer power to support businesses that prioritize accessibility.
You're getting it. It's about using every tool at our disposal to create pressure for change, and this is where that solidarity we discussed in Part 2 comes in. Disabled people have been fighting these battles for decades, but they can't do it alone. We need allies from all walks of life to join the movement and demand a more just and equitable world.
So what are some concrete actions our listeners can take? Give us some specific steps we can start doing today.
Start with education. Learn about the history of disability rights, the social model of disability, and the principles of universal design. Read books and articles by disabled authors and activists. Follow disability justice organizations on social media. Listen to disabled people's lived experiences.
And don't be afraid to ask questions either. I know sometimes people are hesitant to bring up disability for fear of saying the wrong thing, but genuine curiosity and a willingness to learn go a long way.
Absolutely. Approach these conversations with humility and respect. Remember to center the voices of those most impacted by these issues. And don't stop at education. Look around your own community. Is your workplace accessible? Does your school have adequate accommodations for disabled students? Are there barriers in your neighborhood that make it difficult for people with disabilities to navigate?
And if we see those barriers, what can we do?
Speak up. Talk to your employer about making the workplace more inclusive. Advocate for better accommodations at your school. Contact your local representatives and demand policy changes that prioritize accessibility.
And if we see ableism, those attitudes or behaviors that devalue disabled people, we need to call it out. Challenge those harmful stereotypes. Educate those around us. Be an active ally, not a passive bystander.
You got it. It's about recognizing that our liberation is interconnected. A more just world for disabled people is a more just world for everyone. Dr. Hoerricks' article is a call to action for all of us.
This whole conversation has been so eye-opening for me. Thank you for guiding us through this complex and crucial topic. I feel like I have a much deeper understanding of what's at stake in this lawsuit and how it connects to these broader systems of oppression.
It's been my pleasure, and I hope our listeners feel empowered to take action.
Yes, remember, change doesn't happen overnight. It takes sustained effort, collective action, and a willingness to challenge the status quo. But it's a fight worth having.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Let's keep learning, keep pushing for change, and keep building a world where everyone can thrive.